Hi, and welcome to Biology 401, Human Anatomy and Physiology 1. So, for this first introductory part, we're just going to talk about some logistical things and sort of where we're coming from in terms of the study of anatomy and physiology, and a little bit the study of science and sort of science-based medicine sorts of things. So let's get right into it. So, your syllabus is online. Schedule should be there. It's probably not because I posted it on the wrong Blackboard page. So that will be there shortly. Of course, you have no lab safety rules right now, so you just need Blackboard. Actually, read the stupid syllabus. If we were in class, we would hit the high points here because nobody actually reads that. Read the stupid syllabus. It's much shorter than it normally would be, so you're cool. You actually don't need a book. And books are stupid. Nobody reads books. I learned that from the president. So, if you do end up needing a reference text, OpenStax.com. OpenStax. Free textbooks published by Rice University. Excellent textbooks on par with any of the ones that you would pay $350 for. And your textbook is free. If you really need a print textbook, you can buy it on Amazon for like $20. Hell, you could probably go to Kinko's or does that still exist? Whatever. You go somewhere and have them print it off for you. I mean, if you got a laser printer at home, you can print it off annoyingly long. You don't need to do that. So here's the deal with the anatomy book, and here's why I just don't care about your anatomy book. If you've already got one, rock on. If it's an old edition, nobody cares because it's not a book that you sit down and read. It is a reference text. It exists solely for the purpose of clarifying any points that I failed to clarify. So if there's something you need to go back and re-reference, you look it up in the book if you have to. Or, you can just ask or Google it like normal people. But it's a reference book. You're fine without the book. I promise. Nobody's asking you questions straight from the book. I'm not asking you questions straight from the book. I don't require you to read the text. That's a waste of our time. So we're cool. Your grade. You've got 4 lecture exams, 4 lab exams. The lectures are 70% of your grade. The labs are 30% of your grade. Obviously, we're online. There's no makeups. It's the summer. And we're online. All right, so this crap is hard. There's a lot of stuff here. It's not the only thing you've got going on in your life, especially right now. You can probably hear them in the background, but there's a bunch of kids here. They're mine. I made them. It's my fault. They're occasionally loud. Sorry. I realize that a lot of you have the same situation. It is freaking hard to get this done from home. You block off that time to go to class, and that's one thing. But when you're at home, there's 700 other things that you need to be doing right now. You don't have that time blocked. I understand that. Um, the thing is that you do need to learn the concepts here. Now, especially now, my emphasis is a lot more on teaching you foundations rather than to have you memorize stuff. Obviously, no one has all the stuff memorized, except me. Other than that, nobody has all the stuff memorized. When your doctor leaves the room, they're going to go look that up. What the hell's that rash? I don't know, Google that crap. I've never seen that. Yeah, he's gonna go look it up. Maybe not Google, maybe WebMD or a book, something. But yeah, he's like, I'll be right back. No one expects him to know every symptom of every illness ever. And I expect similar ideas from you because now that we're online, there will be times when the point of an exercise will be for you to figure out how to get that information. Because that's how real life works. If you don't know, you look it up or you ask someone. That's how life works. Moving on. Let's talk about anatomy and physiology. What's anatomy? Anatomy is where stuff is. It's all the names of all the stuff. We named it all because we could. Anatomy is what we call a complete science. Nobody's coming up with any new parts. Oh, we didn't even see that other toe there. We gotta find the name for that. That's not happening. You have a what? Oh, we gotta name that crap. No, we know the names of the parts. We know where they are. We're physiology, different story. We're still learning about our physiology. Physiology is the stuff, how stuff works. So anatomy, where stuff is. Physiology, how stuff works. Thing is those two concepts are really difficult to separate. All anatomy is the result of physiology, meaning that is where it is because that's where it functions correctly. At the same time, all physiology is made possible by anatomy, meaning that if stuff isn't in the right place, it doesn't work right. Prime example, my youngest kid, who's actually in bed right now, so you're welcome there, was born with a congenital heart defect called transposition of the great arteries. In this case, the two major blood vessels coming out of his heart were reversed. So his heart was pumping high oxygen blood straight back to the lungs from whence it came, and pumping low oxygen blood out to the body, which obviously is not helpful. So that had to be surgically corrected shortly after birth. He's fine now. It's cool. But those blood vessels, he had to have open heart surgery when he was 6 days old. Fixed it. Now, anatomy is one of the oldest recorded sciences. We have records of this as early as 1600 BC in ancient Egypt. Egyptian papyrus, things that identify like the heart and stuff like that. Uh, they were trying. I mean, it's ancient Egypt, right? They were doing good to get there. They kind of sucked at it, but it's okay. They didn't know where sweat or saliva came from, and they were pretty sure the heart was the only really important organ. This is made obvious by the mummies, where they put the heart in the jar and they threw the brain in the trash can. Heart, you're gonna need that in the afterlife. Brain, we don't know what the hell that's for. Throw in the trash. The Greeks took it upon themselves to name everything. Most of our anatomical terms will be in Latin or Greek, and much of the credit for medical studies comes from a guy named Hippocrates. Hippocrates is known as the father of medicine. So the reason that he's the father of medicine is because he was the first person to reject supernatural causes of illness. Before Hippocrates, if you got sick, it's because God was mad. Hippocrates was the first person to up and say, mm, illness is a product of the environment, not necessarily a punishment. Unfortunately, Hippocrates worked under the idea of something called humorism. Humorism is the idea that the body's got four fluids in it. You can balance those four fluids out, everything would be cool. Unfortunately, the only one of those things she could really balance was blood, and that led to the process of bloodletting, and this was an idea that persisted until the mid-19th century. So until the mid-1800s at least, bloodletting was still a common medical procedure. Incidentally, the only thing bloodletting treats is having too much blood. Somewhere there in the 4th century BC, Aristotle was dissecting animals, identified the between arteries and veins. We say that Aristotle found comparative anatomy, compared the anatomy of different animals, but he still thought the heart was the center of consciousness. The first school proper of anatomy was in Alexandria. Alexandria is Egypt. This is Cairo now. Um, named Alexandria for Alexander the Great, who conquered Cairo, who conquered Egypt, who conquered the New World. So this is the first time they used cadavers to study anatomy. A guy named Herophilus, author of anatomy, was granted permission to perform vivisections on condemned prisoners. He reversed the whole idea that the heart was where intelligence was. Oh, vivisection. That's a good word. A vivisection is much like a dissection, except your subject is still alive. So what I'm telling you is that the father of anatomy is a psychotic mass murderer for science. Here's a rule. If you say it's for science, so later on when I talk about dissecting things, I'll end that with for science, and that's how you know it's cool. So the actual written stuff from Herophilus was lost when they burned in the library in Alexandria in 272. Luckily, people copied this down. One of these guys was Galen. Galen was a physician of the gladiators. He studied wounds without actually dissecting the people because they were sort of dissecting themselves. Galen wrote the first real anatomy book. He determined the function of organs by performing vivisections on animals. Here he's doing that to a pig or a dog or something, and he's like, what happens if we take its liver out? Oh, it dies. And we come up on medieval times. So this goes on for a while, right? And in medieval Europe, studies of anatomy sort of screech to a halt. And we kind of go to magic. We got all sorts of things happening like plagues and crap. People are dying left and right anyway. You've seen Monty Python, like it's that sort of time period. Anatomy that was learned through books that were either copied or passed down. Like they weren't mass-produced books. Books were super expensive. But here we enter a thing that still plagues science and medicine today. And that is the idea that it's wrong to challenge authority. At the time, they thought that everything that could be known about the body was already known. Done. Well done, Galen. Way to figure it out. High five. You're the man. We don't ever have to do this again. Now, note that Galen is performing vivisections on animals. And then he's taking that knowledge and applying it to the physiology of people. Not the same. But it was thought that Galen was the end of this. Around 1020 AD, the Persian physician Avicenna used the works of Galen to write the Canon of Medicine, and the Canon of Medicine became sort of the medical textbook until the 1600s. Somewhere they lost the actual printed work of Galen, and the only way that we know it exists is its reference by Avicenna. These works translated in Latin, they were the medical text. So, one, to study this, you have to read Latin. That immediately creates something where uh, very few people can learn this information. And at the time, it was unsightly for a physician to get his hands dirty. Medical procedures were actually carried out by barbers. Dissections were actually carried out by barbers. Why barbers? Well, they already had something sharp. Why not? So the professor would get a barber, the barber would do the dissection, and the medical professor would direct the dissection. For 1,500 years, doctors were taught to practice medicine based on the anatomy and physiology of dogs. What was killer was that frequently during these dissections carried out by barbers, the barber would not be able to find an organ that Galen described in his Dog People Anatomy book. If that happened, the professor would explain why something was wrong with the cadaver. Because who are you to challenge Galen? Galen wrote the book. There must be something wrong with the cadaver. Maybe that's why he's dead. Or the barber screwed up. You stuck the barber dissect. But it couldn't be something wrong with Galen. The best examples of these, Galen assumed that the heart pumped the best blood to the brain and sort of lesser blood to the rest of the body. Um, in order for this to work, there's all sorts of passageways in the heart that would have to exist. Like, you'd have to have holes in between the chambers of the heart to exchange that blood somewhere. Those don't exist. But for 1,500 years, during these dissections, the professor would swear that it existed. Do you see that opening between the heart chambers? No, you're not a doctor. Next, do you see that opening between the heart chambers? Yes, you're a doctor. Well done. But it doesn't exist. But people were afraid to challenge the ideas that had come before them. Around 1530, a guy named Vesalius graduated medical school. Immediately, they offered him the chair of surgery at his university like he was freaking good. So Vesalius takes this job, and he's like, you know what? We're going to teach some doctors. And he's like, screw this. Screw barbers. Go back to cutting hair. I'll do this myself. So he does the dissection himself. He even encourages the students to get in on this. You want to feel this? You need to see what this feels like. You cut the dude open. Whatever. This was a massive deviation from anything before. He was the first person to point out that Galen had substituted animal anatomy for people anatomy. And before him, no one noticed, which is messed up. So 1,500 years, not only was your doctor practicing medicine based on dog anatomy, they didn't know the difference. So Vesalius admitted he couldn't find those openings between the ventricles of the heart and called them out on it. At some point, he actually had an artist go with him and he challenged the works of Galen drawing for drawing. Vesalius ended up becoming like a royal physician. He was very famous and well known. It worked out really well. Now, we hit the 1600s, 17th, 18th centuries, printing press. Well, now we can print multiple copies of this book. Does it have to be in Latin? Who cares? We can print multiple copies. So we can print copies of drawings. So now people can learn how to do this, learn anatomy through drawings. Lots of famous artists did anatomical drawings. Angelo and Rembrandt and Da Vinci did anatomical studies and drawings. You see a study of the arm from Da Vinci, 1510. Da Vinci backwards writing there. Here is the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp by Rembrandt. Dr. Tulp was the mayor of Amsterdam and a certified anatomist. These dissections, like you see this, were giant events. Dr. Tulp here would have these anatomy fairs. It's like a Renaissance fair for anatomy geeks in the Renaissance, and bring people in, and they're all going to study anatomy and buy T-shirts and refreshments. It was a big deal for the city. Now, other anatomists would travel around, and you'd have anatomists that went from city to city to obtain fresh cadavers. It's not like you just go get a body, right? You had to obtain a cadaver, which means probably an executed prisoner. And I mean, at the time, you screwed up, they'd hang you for anything. Steal a pig, they're going to hang you. Italy was a place where lots of anatomical studies were done. They dissect women there. Equal opportunity dissection. In the 1800s, medicine became more mainstream. You have to realize that doctor has not always been this uber prestigious field like we think of it now. Well into the 1900s, it was not. If you watch period dramas like Downton Abbey, right, they looked down on people who were physicians because it was a blue collar job. And in the 1800s, there were lots of people that wanted to become doctors. Anatomy was more mainstream. How do you go to become a doctor? Well, you have to learn from another doctor. And you ended up with lots of these sort of for-profit anatomy classes. Think like Vista College or whatever, but with cadaver dissection. Well, where do you get a cadaver? Find one. Get creative. One of the more popular means was body snatching. These people were called resurrectionists, and they stole bodies. Now, you can't steal stuff out of the grave. They might execute you if they caught you with that, but you stole the body, like, whatever. Relatives would guard bodies. They'd leave them in the house until decomposition set in so that they're worthless. Maybe they period. So, this created a problem because at some point, demand exceeded supply. Enter Burke and Hare in a boarding house in Scotland, and one of their tenants died. He owed them money. They sold his body to a professor. Give him like $2 for it. They're like, score. A month later, they had another tenant who was sick. He was probably going to die anyway. They just went ahead and finished him off. And then they thought, this is not such a bad gig. So they just invite people over. They're like, hey, you're coming to my house, and we're going to have a drink or seven or a bottle. And they get somebody super drunk, and when they passed out, they'd suffocate them with a pillow. And then, oops, they're dead. And then they'd take them to the doctor and sell their body. And the doctor would be like, hey, you got another cadaver? That's weird, man. It's like, I know, right? I was just laying there, and I thought, well, why waste it? So the doctor didn't ask too many questions, and then he'd make sure they dissected the face first. Like they had CSI or whatever, like they can tell what happened. Even if they'd gotten caught with the body, there was nothing to do about it. They're like, did you kill that guy? No. All right, carry on. Eventually, what happened is they did get caught with a cadaver, and somehow the cops intimidated one of them into testifying against the other one. The one that testified got off free, like he disappeared into the night, never to be heard of again. The other one, well, they did hang him, and then they did a public dissection of him. His skeleton is on display in a museum to this day, and the person dissected him made trinkets from his body. If you look here, it says Burke's Skin Pocketbook. He made notes in this book in the blood of Mr. Burke. Honestly, I think that if I was, worried about murderers, the next person to execute would be the guy who did the dissection. That guy's obviously crazy. Here is another picture of Mr. Burke's skeleton and another calling card case made from his skin. That'll show him, but he never does that again. At the time, the anatomist was like a type of executioner. In fact, he was worse than the executioner. One thing to be dissected, or one thing to be executed, something else to be dissected after you were executed. It was a fate worse than death. They're like, we condemn you to death, and you're like, oh man, and dissection. Oh damn it, not dissection. What if I feel that after I'm dead? And if you were really bad, they would condemn you to dissection, and they'd keep stuff from you. So we condemn you to death and dissection, and we're gonna keep your skeleton in a museum forever. No. So 1832 comes along, and the British people decide that this is utter crap, and they pass a law that makes it really hard to legally get dead body. Right, you can't just find one that falls off a truck anymore. There's a proper procedure to go through, and basically it created so much legal red tape for anyone who wants a cadaver that it shifted all of this into large universities and teaching hospitals, where it remains today. United States law is based mostly on this act. In the United States, it is illegal to buy or sell human tissue. We'll talk about what a tissue is later. Now notice that you can buy or sell bones. You used to be able to buy them on eBay. Those were the days. Human actual bones remains because the tissue's gone. It's just the bone. And we'll talk about this later. But you can't buy or sell tissue. In Texas, anatomy labs, cadaver labs are limited to medical schools. So most other places, undergraduate institutions anyway, rely on animal dissection models or some other form. For us, we will be relying on cadaver dissection, but virtual cadaver dissection through the use of our anatomage table. Today's anatomy can be taught on patients that are alive. Our imaging equipment allows us to three-dimensionally image a patient and render that back in 3D using the anatomage table, which you cannot see right now, but is totally sitting in my office at South Plains. It's a high definition magic device that allows us to virtually dissect a patient from CT MRI scans. Again, if this were a normal semester, I would tell you that if you have your own MRI and CT scan, we could actually put it in the table and do this much the same thing. And go through and look at your scans in 3 dimensions and dissect you. It's kind of weird in 3 dimensions. All right, so more on that later as well. What we know about our body physiology comes from hundreds and hundreds of years of science. Now, science is specific. Now more than ever, this is important. When I say that something is science, what I mean is that it's based on assumptions and methods that give us testable, reliable, and objective answers. Testable, right? Test it. Reliable, those results are accurate. And I don't care what the results say, those are the results. So what makes something science? First, science can never be proven, it's only disproven. Great quote from Einstein, no amount of experimentation can prove me right, and yet a single experiment can prove me wrong. Meaning that if you can't falsify an idea, it's not science. When we do science experiments, as scientists, when we do research, we're not looking for evidence to make our hypothesis correct. We're looking for situations that might make our hypothesis wrong. Because of that, science is always changing. What we know today might be wrong tomorrow as technology advances, as our ability to ask those questions changes. We used to think that the entire body was controlled by the nervous system and nothing else, unaware of an endocrine system. And it wasn't until we could look for these tiny chemicals in the blood that we were able to identify lots of parts of the endocrine system. The idea changes as we're better at asking these questions. So here's an idea of falsifiability. And this is grossly oversimplified, I know. But our first statement here, Bigfoot's real. You can prove that Bigfoot is real. How? Bring me Bigfoot. But it is not possible to disprove that. How could I prove to you that, how could I disprove that idea? Well, I'd have to look at every animal on the planet, make sure none of them are Bigfoot. That's not feasible. I can't do that. I can't search every centimeter of this planet, make sure there's no Bigfoot. Statement 2. Bigfoot does not exist. That's very easy to falsify. Bring in Bigfoot. My bad. I was wrong. It exists. But I can't ever prove that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Because again, I'd have to look at every animal on the planet simultaneously. None of them Bigfoot. All right, I was right. Because no one's actually showed up with real evidence of a Bigfoot. The current hypothesis, there is no Bigfoot. That can change. The minute someone brings me the head of Bigfoot, all right. The next thing, science is testable. We do experiments to test science. If you can't test it, it's not science. Magic. So we can test things like genetics. We can't test the Bermuda Triangle. The next thing is science is repeatable. If it only happened once, it may have been an accident. So the best example of this is pharmaceutical companies. Thousands of trials before they ever see people. So yeah, that medication cured coronavirus in the bat. But what happens when we give it to a person? So we test it thousands and thousands of times because results should be repeatable. Finally, science is public. Science is published in peer-reviewed journals. A peer-reviewed journal is a journal that's reviewed by other scientists. They review the work and they tear it apart, see how it's wrong. They may test it themselves. They want to look at your research. They want to know if it's valid, and they offer critiques. Unfortunately, today, the line between what is science, what is not science, is really, really blurry. This has lots of issues in like politics, but most importantly, medicine, and now more than ever. It is extremely important for you to be able to distinguish between science-based medicine and not science-based medicine. When I say important, I mean quite possibly our survival is going to depend on this. We have to be able to separate out reality from wishful thinking, reality from pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is fake science. Pseudoscience is going to use vague or exaggerated claims. Pseudoscience will always rely on confirmation rather than falsification. When people do experiments for pseudoscience, they do experiments to prove themselves right. Lots of this is harmless, like cryptozoology, Bigfoot, they're not hurting anybody. Ghost hunters, that one's funny. Adventures, that one's the best. UFO things, like, whatever. When it happens in medicine, people are dying. People are dying because they're trying stuff that has no scientific merit. Or they're not doing something, in our case, that has scientific merit. Do we know 100%? Never, ever. We get the best we can. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes the ideas change. Right now, we have the best ideas we have. So, the reference here is obviously with our pandemic currently. There's so many people out there that will tell you it's not real. It is real. You want to debate that? I can send you to people I know that have lost relatives. And they'll tell you it's very real. There are people that will tell you that it prevented with a variety or stopped with a variety of over-the-counter available things. Don't you think that that's come up before? People that have this idea. There's so many misconceptions about masks, prevention, and the virus itself. It's really messed up. And at some point, people just get tired of it. At the hell with it. Because nobody knows. Or they decided everybody's lying or there's an agenda. This is getting us in trouble right now. And people are dying because of it. Now we can look at more specific examples here. This is psychic surgery. Psychic surgery is when if you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when he rips the kid's heart out, that's psychic surgery. It reaches into you and pulls something out, doesn't leave a mark on you. What's he pull out? Cancer. Cancer. So here you see him pulling cancer out of this young lady. She's cancer free. She's not. Um, this is one of the most obvious forms of what we would call quackery. It's utter crap. There's the comedian Andy Kaufman. He underwent psychic surgery to treat lung cancer. They're like, Andy, you've got lung cancer. And he's like, really, what do I do? They're like, chemotherapy, surgery. He's like, oh, no, you know what? Let me get a second opinion from a witch doctor. So he goes and he gets psychic surgery, and the psychic surgeon's like, you're cancer free. He's like, I'm cancer free. And then he died of cancer. You're like, well, that's an extreme example. That kind of crap happens where people are dying of stuff because they think that something they read on Facebook has some validity. My mom is diabetic and she called me a while back. Somebody posted on Facebook, put a piece of okra in water and drink 1 glass of okra water a day. You don't have to take your diabetes medication. She's like, is this true? I was like, am I inheriting money? She's like, no. And I'm like, well, no, it's a giant lie then. When people believe that, it can cause harm. Like, she knew that there probably wasn't anything to that, but there are people that don't. There are people that see that and they're like, well, I'll do that. And they stop taking their medicine and start drinking okra water. If you're guilty sharing these sorts of stupid things, please stop. If you don't have scientific backing for these medical things, you're doing people a disservice by sharing that information. One of the more popular things right now is essential oil. And today, there are manufacturers that claim that these oils will prevent, treat infection or chronic disease. There's absolutely no scientific basis to that idea. Some of them are actually harmful if they touch you. In 2014, we had a mild Ebola outbreak, and the FDA issued warning letters threatening imprisonment to some of the CEOs of these essential oil companies because they had made claims that their essential oils prevented or treated Ebola. And the FDA saw this as a public health hazard, which it was. You've got this guy, he's got Ebola, but he's using thieves' oil, so he should be fine. He spreads Ebola to 1 million other people, and it's 28 days later or whatever. Again, no scientific evidence. Then there's lots of anecdotal stuff. Like your cousin will tell you, oh, it worked great for my seizures or schizophrenia or whatever the hell. That's not science. That one dude that says, oh yeah, it worked great. It totally fixed my, stomach ulcers. That's not science. It's not how that works. You're like, well, there's a whole message board of people online. There's 1,000 people. They're like, yeah, I totally didn't get coronavirus because I was doing this. How do you know that was the causative agent? Did you compensate for variables? Did you do statistical analysis? Let's look at the snake oil, sort of the original quackery there. Why does any of this exist? The first thing is ignorance. And that I hope to cure during this semester so that you will know enough about how your physiology works that you can look at something and say, no, that's not how that works. So you can look at the foot bath that's supposed to detoxify your blood through your skin. You can look at that and say, nope, that's not how that works. That's kidney's job, unless you're soaking your kidneys in that bath, not losing any toxins through your feet. The second thing is placebo effect, meaning that you feel better. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with placebos. When you have a patient whose symptoms cannot be treated, if you have a patient that is in chronic pain and nothing helps, you give them a placebo and that helps, then you just help them, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you have a patient that has cancer and you give them a placebo and they die of a treatable cancer, you suck. That's not cool. The next thing that happens is something called regression fallacy. And this is a big point for us right now, too. Regression fallacy is the idea that whatever it was that you did changed something. You were taking vitamin C, you didn't get coronavirus. Now, can you correlate those two things? Do you know for a fact that if you hadn't taken that vitamin C, you would have gotten it? No. Regression fallacy is this idea that your actions have an effect, and they don't always. You can't always correlate your actions with the result. Because medicine should be science-based, and it continually changes, we do develop a distrust of medicine. And right now, this is a thing. Our medical community was slow to get on this pandemic. There was lots of confusion, and still is lots of confusion about symptoms and tests and prevention and treatments, and there's just so much distrust of how the system works. So then of course, there's fear and desperation. If you're dying, if you're suffering, yeah, I'll try that. And I've been guilty of this. You've got the flu, you see the airborne or whatever that is on the shelf, you're like, I'll try anything because I'm miserable. Does that have any effect? No, it does not. There's no evidence to do that. And if I'm trashing your miracle here right now, I'm sorry. You've been living on the placebo effect. It's not, but again, there's nothing wrong with that if it makes you feel better. And you couldn't do anything otherwise. Our big issue is when it makes you feel better and you're not really fixing anything, but you could, right? You have syphilis. I could give you penicillin, but why don't I give you this essential oil? And you're like, oh, it totally feels like I don't have syphilis. You still do, but we can fix it. That's the problem with all of this, is when people forego legitimate treatments for alternative treatment. Of course, actual medicine is expensive, and that's ridiculous. And usually these sorts of other therapies are cheaper. And then at some point, there's fraud where people are just going to rip you off. And pride has a lot to do with it as well. If you spent $3,000 on homeopathic cures, then you're going to stand by that because you're invested in the idea. It hurts to think that maybe you were wrong. People get mad about this. And if I've made you mad, I just don't care. Whatever. You can believe what you want to believe. Yeah, science doesn't care what you believe. Viruses don't care what you believe. What's the harm? People die. Right now, 20% of Americans believe that vaccines cause autism. They do not. The actual study that linked vaccines to autism, Dr. Andrew Wakefield published, it was fraudulent. He made it up to make money because he had developed his own measles vaccine. But you use a new measles vaccine if the old one was fine. You had to make the old one bad. So he did. The old measles vaccine causes autism. Mine doesn't. It's like if I started my own cigarette company, I'd be like, other people's cigarettes cause cancer, mine are fine. It's a giant lie. 37% of Americans currently believe that the government has a cure to many different diseases, but they're withholding it. Pharmaceutical companies can make money. Now, I'll admit, I've had my moments here where I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. There's something going on. But here's the thing. If there was something out there, they would patent it and sell it to you. Right? And lots of our medications are plant derived. Yeah, they slap a patent on that, and Bayer Pharmaceuticals owns it and sells it to you. You make epinephrine. That EpiPen is damned expensive. It's not expensive to make. It's super cheap to make. So no, if there was like a natural cure or whatever that could fix different things, they'd package it and sell it to you. If cinnamon and honey cured cancer, it'd be a prescription drug, and you'd pay $1,500 an ounce for it. It doesn't, so you can go buy it. In the developing world, pseudoscience is causing epidemics like the AIDS epidemic. In South Africa, around 30% of the population believes that witchcraft causes HIV. 20% believes the CIA made AIDS, and another 20% believes that AIDS comes in condoms. This is much like the number of people right now that believe that wearing masks will give you coronavirus. That doesn't even make sense. Around 3 million people die every year from an illness that could have been prevented by a vaccine. We don't even have stats on the number of people that delay treatments in search for some sort of alternative medicine. So this is a serious issue now more than ever. It is important that when you, as a future medical professional, share information with other people, that it is accurate and scientific, that it's not your gut feeling, it's not pseudoscience. Because what will happen is you have someone who has COVID-19 in this case right now, positive for it. They know they have it. And they go home and they're like, well, you know what? I was supposed to quarantine for 14 days. I'm taking elderberry and vitamin D. I'm fine. Going to McDonald's. And then the rest of us are host. This is problematic. So if you're one of those people who likes to share this sort of medical advice on Facebook, again, scientific, science-based medicine. Do not share anecdotes. This worked for my mom's best friend's cousin's brother's roommate. Don't share stuff. If it looks like it's too good to be true, it is. So, how do you tell the difference? First is the source. Facebook's a giant lying website of lies. Dr. Oz is a highly paid professional who gets paid to say whatever they pay. Raspberry ketones cause you to lose weight. What the hell is a raspberry ketone? Yeah, he doesn't know either. Infomercials? Really? Think that at 3 o'clock in the morning, some random retired journalist is going to have the cure to everything? Can't run it during the day, but it's on at 3 o'clock in the morning. Magazines aren't legitimate sources. Obviously, you can't read it. You can't believe everything you see online. The next thing is the plural of anecdote is not data. Right? Data is not the same thing as a bunch of people telling their story. Well, that worked great for me. I read some anecdotes once. Narcoleptics. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder where you fall asleep a lot. We'll talk about it when we get to sleep. But there were several people who were, the anecdotes were, they were resistant to drug addiction. They don't get addicted to drugs. There's absolutely no scientific basis. Those are anecdotes. And right, without legitimate studies, it doesn't work like that. You can't just a bunch of people said this worked. Let's go do it. You need actual scientific study. The last thing is common sense. I'm hoping that through this class, you know enough about physiology that you can look at something and say, yeah, no, that's not how that works. Sorry. Magic rocks. Nope, not happening. I care about this a lot because it is affecting us so much right now. And I want you to have a working knowledge here. Because one day, statistically speaking, you're probably going to end up seeing one of my kids. All 5 of the boys are in this picture. Although you can just see the legs of one of them. They're all 5 here. Yeah, they're all boys. There's 5. Good time in my house. So, I don't, I need to be able to trust you, is what I'm saying. Once you understand stuff like muscle cramps, you're not going to tell people, hey, you can fix muscle cramps by sleeping with a bar of soap under your mattress. That's a thing. I promise you, you post on Facebook right now. You're like, what do you do for muscle cramps? Someone will post in there, put a bar of soap under your mattress. I don't know how it works, but it does. No, it doesn't. How would it even work? Does it soak up the muscle cramps through the mattress? What happens if you use the bar of soap? Do you have to throw the bar of soap away? What if somebody else uses the bar of soap? Does it transfer cramps to them? What if it's like uterine cramps? If I use the soap, I don't even have a uterus. What happens there? So many questions I have about this. How is that ever supposed to work? I don't know, but it does. No, it doesn't. That is regression fallacy. The idea that you did something that made it stop. It just stopped. It happened. It stops on its own. The soap had nothing. All right. For lots of people in this class, the hardest thing is terms. They're Latin, they're Greek, they're hard to say, they're hard to spell. We've standardized all the names starting in 98. All the anatomy geeks got together and wrote the book with the names in it. The biggest thing they did is they rejected eponyms. An eponym is a term from somebody's name. So currently, we don't say fallopian tube. We'll do. We're not supposed to say fallopian tube because, oddly enough, that's named for a guy. Yeah, who knew, right? The correct term is uterine tube, which is actually more descriptive and more helpful because that's what it is. It's a tube from the ovary to the uterus. Fallopian tube, I mean, everybody knows what it is, but if you didn't, that name doesn't really help you out. So we standardized everything. We got rid of all those things that are named. It's important that you say things right. You don't sound stupid. It's important that you spell things right so you don't screw somebody. Right? Change one letter in ilium, and you change the hip to the small one. And hopefully the surgeon caught that and didn't start cutting. Saying it, it's important because, again, you don't want to sound stupid. When I taught at the Gross Anatomy at Levitt Tech, um, I just one guy that just religiously mispronounced stuff. It was funny and sad simultaneously. Is this the esophagus? You mean esophagus, right? Sure. Just don't sound stupid. Try to say things correctly. Do your best to spell things because it will be important. When we study anatomy, we use directional terms. These are important clinically. I'm not just going to throw these out there like that lady that teaches your Spanish class that refuses to speak English. We'll work these in as we go. You do need to be familiar with them so that you can use them appropriately. In a clinical setting, they will just use them. All directional terms are based on anatomical position. In anatomical position, the palms are facing forward. They're in the supine position. This is important because in this position, the radius and the ulna are parallel. Turn the arm over, the radius crosses over the ulna, and it's more difficult to describe. We'll be looking at sections of the body. There'll be cuts along the plane. 3 different planes we care about. Here is the sagittal plane, dividing the body into left and right halves. Here is the frontal plane, dividing the body into anterior and posterior. Here is a transverse plane, superior and inferior divided here across. Here are some important directional terms. I'm not going to read over all of them, but you should be familiar with them. And you should be able to use them. Right? You should be able to say that the wrist is distal to the elbow, or the shoulder is proximal to the elbow. The skin is superficial to the muscle. The head superior to the neck. That sort of thing. Left and right always refer to the organisms left and right, not the observer. Right? When we go back and we look at this lady, right? Even though this is on your left side, that's her right hand. If that makes sense. So we're always referring to the patient's left or right, not as you look at it. Caudal and rostral, contralateral we might use on the opposite side. Visceral means organs, guts, and parietal means the body wall. There are specific regions of the body that get special names, things like axillary and brachial. I don't by any means expect you to memorize all of these words. Over time, you will get used to using them. As we immerse in this, we will be using these terms and you'll get the hang of it. So no, I'm not going to ask you to memorize all these things, but we will work them in through the semester. The abdomen is divided into quadrants. This helps us limit things that could be causing pain. So you go in and you have this left upper quadrant pain. Well, that's where the stomach is. Right lower quadrant. Well, that's where the appendix is. So we can kind of limit things based on those regions. Within the body, there are cavities filled with organs. The dorsal cavity. The dorsal cavity is where we find the cranial cavity for the brain and the vertebral canal for the spinal cord. The ventral cavity is divided into thoracic and abdominal pelvic. And the thoracic and abdominal cavity are separated by the diaphragm. So there's the dorsal cavity back here. And there's the ventral cavity up in the front. Right there's the diaphragm, the muscle under your lungs, and it divides dorsal. It divides thoracic and abdominal. A ventral view of this. Here are the lungs sitting in the pleural cavities. Heart sitting in the pericardial cavity. Now this semester we get to learn anatomy systematically. So by the different systems of the body. This semester we'll talk about the skin, the bones, the muscle, and the nervous system. We'll get everything else next semester. If we were doing this in a gross anatomy class, we could learn anatomy regionally, meaning we could do anatomy and physiology of the arm, blood vessels, bones, muscles, whatever, all at once, because you don't get a second shot at that dissection. Now, we do. So we can look at things system. So there are some themes that are going to come up throughout the semester. Cell theory. Everything that's going on is because of the cells. Homeostasis. We'll talk about in just a second. Evolution, yes. A lot of our physiology we can't understand without looking at other organisms. We'll talk about that as we come across. Big picture thing is the hierarchy of structure. We start with very small building blocks and we stack them on top of each other and get bigger and bigger units. But the big overarching theme It's the unity of form and function. Anatomy is a result of physiology, and physiology is made possible by anatomy. So to wrap this up, let's talk about homeostasis. Homeostasis means that we are maintaining a constant internal environment. Oh, that's yellow. It's kind of the goal of your physiology. How do we maintain homeostasis? Well, we maintain homeostasis through a process called negative feedback. Oops. Negative feedback. Negative feedback is when the product of a system inhibits the system. So let's think real world example here. The thermostat that is currently in the room you're in. That thermostat on the wall. Now you set the thermostat at 72 degrees. All right. Temperature in the room is 74 degrees. So now the thermostat turns on the air conditioner. The air conditioner blows out cold air, and that 74 degrees goes down. And once it reaches 72 degrees, the thermostat shuts off. The product of the system, the cold air, turned off. That's negative feedback. If we were to graph that, what that graph would look like. So we graphed the temperature in your room. What it would look like is this. It's never a flat line 72 degrees in your room. Temperature goes up, air conditioner comes on, temperature comes back down. Temperature starts to go up, air conditioner comes back on, temperature goes back down. We don't let it vary much, but it does vary within a narrow range. This is called dynamic equilibrium. And this is the result of negative feedback. You should know that negative feedback is slow, it is predictable, and it is what maintains homeostasis. And homeostasis, again, kind of the goal of your physiology. Deviations from homeostasis are often problems. All right, so that's going to wrap this up for this course. I'll get these YouTube lectures up just as quickly as I can, and they will be in a playlist so that you can reference them along with the slideshows that are on your board. This first exam will cover up through histology, I believe, and bones of the skull. So look for those other lectures that will go in this first unit to come up on YouTube soon.